Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Definitely. Always up for a good historical exploration.
This time, we're heading to ancient Egypt. We're going to be checking out this amazing YouTube video from the Fall of Civilizations channel. They really go in depth on the whole story of ancient Egypt.
It's a pretty good overview of the rise, the long endurance, and then, of course, the eventual decline.
Right, like all civilizations, they had their moment in the sun, so to speak.
Exactly.
So I guess we should start with the obvious. The Nile River. It's kind of a big deal, right?
Oh, yeah, you could say that. More than a big deal. More like the absolute bedrock of everything.
I mean, I know it provided water and fertile land, but it seems like it was even more than that.
Oh, absolutely. The Nile was like, it was like this heartbeat of their world. The floods, they were so reliable, so predictable. It gave them this sense of like cosmic order.
So it wasn't just about survival, it shaped their whole worldview.
Exactly. Unlike other civilizations who had, unpredictable rivers, they saw the Nile as this source of stability, this harmony with the universe.
It's almost like the river was this divine gift.
You could say that. Even the fact that it flows, south to north, it's unusual. Most rivers don't do that. And that influenced their maps, their understanding of the cosmos. It was all tied together.
And then there's the winds, the prevailing winds that allowed them to sail upstream.
Yeah, it gets the current. It's like nature was giving them a helping hand.
Totally. And they weren't just, passively accepting these gifts. They developed systems to work with nature, like those nilometers, right, to measure the flood levels.
Oh, yeah. Those were essential. Too little flooding or too much could mean disaster for their crops. So they had to be really smart about it.
It's like this balance between respecting nature's power and then using their own ingenuity to manage it.
And their resourcefulness, it wasn't limited to just engineering. You see it in their language, too, their writing. The emergence of hieroglyphs is still a bit of a puzzle.
Yeah, that's something I've always found interesting. I mean, kind of strange even. It's like hieroglyphs just appeared fully formed. It's different from other writing systems like cuneiform, which evolved over time.
Exactly. It's a sudden explosion of complexity, a really sophisticated system of symbols and sounds. It makes you wonder about their influences, right? Maybe there were earlier writing systems in Africa that we haven't discovered yet.
Right, like there's a whole missing chapter in the story of writing.
It wouldn't be the first time we've had to rethink our assumptions about history.
That's for sure. And speaking of assumptions, I was reading that even the term pharaoh, the word we use for their kings, wasn't actually used by the early Egyptians.
It's true. It comes from para, which meant great house. And it really only became like the common term much later.
So sometimes our image of ancient Egypt, what we think we know, needs a little adjusting.
It's always good to dig a little deeper.
Definitely. And speaking of digging deeper, let's talk about those pyramids. I mean, they're just mind-blowing, the scale, the ambition. It's hard to even comprehend how they built them.
The Old Kingdom, that was like the age of pyramids. And it all starts with Imhotep, a brilliant architect.
Imhotep, the guy who designed Djosir's step pyramid, right? That was the first big one.
Yeah, the first large-scale use of dressed stone. That set the stage for those smooth-sided pyramids we all recognize. And, Imhotep, he wasn't just an architect. He was also a physician, a priest. Some even considered him a magician.
A true Renaissance man, ancient Egyptian style. But even geniuses face challenges, right?
Of course. Look at the bent pyramid of Sneferu. Started with a steep angle, but then as it got taller, cracks started appearing. Had to change the angle midway through.
To prevent the whole thing from collapsing.
Yep, physics doesn't care if you're a pharaoh.
So this Sneferu kept at it. He didn't give up. Eventually built the Red Pyramid, the first truly successful, smooth-sided one.
Right, and that paved the way for Khufu and his Great Pyramid of Giza.
The ultimate pyramid. 2.3 million stone blocks. 6 million tons.
That's like, what, 100,000 elephants worth of stone?
It's insane, and they did it in just 23 years.
Yeah.
The logistics are just unimaginable, quarrying the stone, transporting it, placing it so precisely.
And don't forget the alignment.
Yeah.
It's almost perfectly aligned with true north.
That must have taken some serious astronomical knowledge.
Oh, for sure. And by the way, contrary to what some people believe, it wasn't built by slaves.
Really?
Yeah, we have records from an overseer, Mirror, his diary. It describes skilled artisans, seasonal laborers, working for rations. And it's interesting, they had these work gangs with names. Friends of Khufu, Drunkards of Menkar.
That's amazing. Drunkards of Menkar. It's like a glimpse into their humor, their sense of camaraderie.
Totally humanizes the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all sunshine and laughs.
Yeah.
Of course, there are those unfinished pyramids.
Right, those are kind of eerie, those abandoned projects.
Sometimes a pharaoh would die before the pyramid was completed, or there'd be some unforeseen event. It just shows the risks involved in these massive undertakings.
And the dedication. What do you think drove them to keep pushing those boundaries, building bigger and bigger?
It's a good question. Was it pure ego? Or was there a deeper spiritual meaning to these pyramids?
Maybe a bit of both.
Probably. But regardless of the motivation, the pyramids transformed Egyptian society, led to more complex bureaucracy, a skilled workforce, a strong central authority.
It's like the pyramids themselves are a physical embodiment of their achievements, cultural, technological, spiritual.
It's a good way to put it. But even empires built on such grand foundations can crumble.
That's the thing about history, right? Nothing lasts forever. So what happened after this golden age of pyramid building?
Well, eventually, the pharaoh's authority started to weaken. Power shifted to regional governors, called nomarchs.
So decentralization again.
Yep. That, combined with internal conflicts, maybe even environmental factors, led to the collapse of the Old Kingdom.
So it's not just a straight line of progress, is it? More like these cycles of rise and fall, fragmentation and unification. Fascinating. So what came after the Old Kingdom?
Well, out of the ashes of that collapse, you get the Middle Kingdom. But it's a different kind of flourishing. It's not so much about those massive pyramids anymore.
Right.
It's more about, well, a kind of surge in Egyptian literature.
Oh, interesting. Like what kind of stuff are we talking about here?
Well, you've got the Tale of Sinuhe. You familiar with that one?
Oh, yeah, vaguely. Isn't that the one about the guy who travels to all these foreign lands and ends up getting homesick?
That's the one. It's almost like an ancient travel blog, in a way.
Yeah.
Full of adventure and that longing for home.
It's amazing how some things, just stay so relatable across thousands of years.
Right. It gives us this glimpse into their worldview, their values, what mattered to them. And then you have the Tales of Wonder.
Tales of Wonder. That sounds fun.
Oh, they are. Supposedly, these fantastical stories told to the Pharaoh Khufu by his sons.
Ah, okay. So like campfire stories passed down through generations.
Exactly. Filled with wisdom and entertainment. A little bit of everything.
I like it. But what about that, the tale of the shipwrecked sailor? Now, that one always stuck with me. It feels so, I don't know, so modern. It's a story within a story.
And it focuses on an ordinary man, not a king or a god.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I like about it. It's like they were starting to explore those more, I don't know, universal human themes,
Yeah.
feelings of being lost and alone, facing the unknown. It's something we can all relate to, even today.
It does make you wonder if there was like a growing interest in those individual experiences during that time, the power of storytelling for its own sake, not just for, glorifying the pharaoh.
Right, right. It's like a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And speaking of everyday life, this period also gives us a much clearer picture of what it was like to be just an average Egyptian.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You've got the papyrus lancing,
That's the one with the
master scribe, yeah.
trying to convince his student that being a scribe is the best job in the world, right?
Exactly. And he goes on and on about how awful all the other professions are.
So basically, a career guidance pamphlet from ancient times.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And we learn about, washermen and potters and cobblers,
Yeah.
all those jobs that kept their society running.
It's so cool how these little details can bring the past to life, Makes you realize they weren't so different from us.
Exactly. Facing those same daily struggles, those same choices about how to make a living.
But wouldn't a scribe also face challenges? I mean, were they really living the high life compared to everyone else?
Well, no job is without its downsides, right?
Yeah.
Scribes definitely had a privileged position, but I'm sure they had long hours, demanding bosses. Plus, the pressure of getting those records right.
Makes sense. Every job has its trade-offs. But let's not forget about one of the most important parts of any culture.
What's that?
Food. What did the ancient Egyptians eat?
Well, they had a pretty balanced diet, actually. Bread, beer, lots of vegetables, fruits, meats.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Oh, and they had this rather unique way of cooking hedgehogs.
Hold on, hedgehogs.
Yeah, they would wrap them in clay and bake them. Apparently, it removes the spines quite effectively.
Interesting technique. Not sure I'd be brave enough to try it, though.
Probably for the best. But we can't talk about Egyptian life without mentioning cats.
Oh, of course. They weren't just pets, they were practically royalty.
Their domestication, it goes back thousands of years in Egypt, and they were highly valued. Not just as companions, but for their, pest control skills.
Right, protecting the grain stores from mice and all that.
Exactly. Grain was essential to their survival, so those cats were like little guardians.
Little furry protectors. But there was a deeper spiritual connection too, right?
Okay.
Weren't cats associated with the goddess Bastet?
Absolutely. She was often depicted with a cat's head, representing fertility and protection. And let me tell you, the Egyptians were fiercely protective of their feline companions. Killing a cat, even by accident, could have serious consequences.
Wow. They really took their cat love seriously. But even with all the literary achievements, this fascinating culture, the Middle Kingdom couldn't escape the cycle of decline, could it?
Nope, unfortunately not. That familiar pattern starts to emerge again. Decentralization, internal conflicts, and possibly even some environmental challenges starting to play a role.
It's like history is always rhyming, isn't it?
It does seem that way sometimes. Senusret III, he tried his best to maintain order, secure the borders. But even his statues, you look at them and they have this weary expression, almost like they foreshadow the turmoil to come.
It's like those statues captured the weight of responsibility, the growing pressures on the kingdom.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And then you have Sobekneferu, the first woman to hold the full title of pharaoh. It was a pretty big deal.
It was. It speaks to those changing social norms, right? And the desperation to find a strong leader in times of crisis. But sadly, her reign was short-lived. Couldn't prevent the kingdom from sliding into what we call the Second Intermediate Period. So another period of fragmentation, instability, a revolving door of rulers. What new challenges did Egypt face this time around?
Well, aside from the usual internal power struggles, you have external threats as well. The Nubians to the south were gaining power. And then you have this new group that appears on the scene, the Hyksos.
Ah, the Hyksos. They've always fascinated me. Where did they even come from? And how did they manage to, take control of a chunk of Egypt?
Their origins are still kind of debated, but evidence suggests they were a diverse group, probably came from the Eastern Mediterranean region, driven by a mix of things, maybe migration, maybe conquest, who knows. But their arrival coincides with one of the most significant natural disasters in human history, the eruption of Thera.
The Thera eruption, that's the one that...
Created the island of Santorini.
Right. It was a massive volcanic eruption, triggered tsunamis, sent volcanic ash across huge distances. Some scholars even think it might have inspired the myth of Atlantis.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And, that eruption would disrupted trade routes, caused widespread chaos. It probably weakened Egypt, created an opportunity for the Hyksos. And they were a formidable force, I'll give them that. They introduced new military technologies like the chariot. Their tactics were pretty advanced.
So it must have been a humiliating blow for the Egyptians, seeing their ancient capital, Memphis, fall under the control of these foreign rulers.
Always a dark time for sure. Kingdom divided, threats on multiple fronts. The Hyksos in the north, the Nubians in the south, internal conflicts simmering. But even in the face of all that spirit of resistance, it never really died out.
And that's where Khamos comes in, right? The king of Thebes.
Ah, Khamos. This guy, he absolutely refused to accept Hyksos domination. You read his inscriptions, and it's clear he hated them. He was determined to reunite Egypt. It's really powerful stuff.
He sounds like a true warrior king, driven by, a desire for revenge, for justice.
Well, his father had been brutally killed, likely in battle against the Hyksos. So yeah, he had a very personal stake in this fight. And despite concerns from his own court, he launches this campaign to drive out the invaders.
He doesn't mess around.
He secures the southern border first, then launches a surprise attack against the Hyksos. And his account of the battle, even if it's a bit embellished, it gives you a sense of the brutality, the chaos of this conflict.
So he was successful.
Khamos was a brilliant strategist,
Yeah.
used a combination of naval power and ground forces, even managed to recapture Memphis, a symbolic victory for sure, really boosted Egyptian morale.
And then his successor, Ahmose I, finished the job, right? Drove out the Hyksos completely, ushered in the era of the New Kingdom. What a turnaround. But what was it about the New Kingdom that made it so powerful?
Well, the New Kingdom sees this resurgence of Egyptian strength, driven by territorial expansion, ambitious building projects, and, some truly remarkable pharaohs. Interestingly, they adopted the chariot from their former Hyksos enemies.
So they learned from their adversaries, turned a weakness into a strength.
Exactly. Smart move. And of course, you can't forget about Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh.
She was a powerful ruler, defied conventions, led Egypt through a period of peace and prosperity. Her expedition to the land of Punt, it's vividly described in inscriptions. They brought back exotic goods, solidified her status as a pharaoh who was willing to, reach beyond traditional boundaries.
She was even depicted with a beard and male attire in some statues. Talk about making a statement.
Oh yeah, she wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. But then you have Akhenaten, the heretic king. He brings about this radical religious revolution.
Akhenaten, right. He was the one who focused on the sun disk, Achen.
Elevated it to the status of the sole god. Closed temples to Amun. Built a whole new capital at Amarna. Complete departure from traditional Egyptian polytheism.
What a dramatic shift. What do you think was going on there? Some people see it as a genuine spiritual awakening, others as more of a power grab, using religion to consolidate his authority.
It's hard to say for sure, probably a bit of both. But what's really interesting is that a devastating plague might have struck during a grand ceremony at Amarna.
A plague, really?
Yeah, and that might have undermined his authority, the acceptance of his new religion. Imagine that, having your grand vision for this new religious order shattered by a pandemic.
It's a stark reminder of how fragile even the most ambitious plans can be.
No kidding. And then you have Tutankhamun, the boy king. His fame rests mostly on the accidental discovery of his intact tomb. He reversed Akhenaten's religious reforms, restored Amun, tried to erase his predecessor's legacy.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? Tutankhamun died so young, accomplished relatively little during his reign, but he becomes one of the most famous pharaohs of all.
It makes you wonder how history will judge us, right? What unexpected twists and turns might shape our own legacies.
It's a humbling thought, for sure. But moving on, we can't forget about Ramses II, the great builder and warrior. His reign, it's like the pinnacle of New Kingdom power.
Yeah, when people think of ancient Egypt, he's often the pharaoh that comes to mind. His epic battle against the Hittites at Kadesh is legendary.
I've read about that, the Kadesh poem. It's like something out of a Hollywood movie, all those chariots clashing, and Ramses personally leading the charge.
It's definitely a dramatic retelling, probably exaggerated, but it captures that sense of epic scale, the clash of empires. And, Ramses didn't achieve a decisive victory at Kadesh, but he was a skilled military leader, secured Egypt's northern borders, and eventually he negotiates a peace treaty with the Hittites.
Ending decades of conflict, that was a major achievement.
Oh yeah, one of his biggest. But then you have his building projects. Magnificent temples at Abu Simbel, his new capital, Pi-Ramesses. Some believe that might be the biblical city of Ramesses.
The guy got around, that's for sure. He left his mark all over Egypt.
It was a golden age. But even golden ages have to end sometime.
Right. Nothing lasts forever. So what happens next? The New Kingdom starts to decline. Was it those mysterious sea peoples? They've always sounded so, so ominous to me.
The Sea Peoples were definitely a factor. They were a force to be reckoned with, attacking coastal cities, disrupting trade. But you got to remember, the Egyptians defeated them under Ramses III.
Oh, that's right, at the mouth of the Nile.
Major victory, showcased their naval power.
But was it a Pyrrhic victory? You know what I mean? The Lament to Amun, it paints this bleak picture, societal breakdown, droughts, a sense of despair. It's a pretty stark contrast to those triumphant inscriptions from earlier pharaohs.
That's a good point. The victory probably came at a cost. Resources were depleted, surrounding regions in chaos, and, internal problems hadn't gone away. Plus, you have to consider the Haram conspiracy.
What was that again?
A plot to assassinate Ramses III.
From within his own harem.
Yeah, it shows you the level of intrigue, the vulnerability of even the most powerful rulers.
Yeah.
So you've got those external threats, internal strife, maybe even climate change starting to play a role. It all kind of creates this perfect storm.
So the New Kingdom crumbles. Does that mean, the end for ancient Egypt? Do they just fade away?
Not quite, not quite. It's interesting. You see this power shift happening. The pharaohs are weakened, and the high priests of Amun up there in Thebes, they start to gain more and more influence.
It's like that struggle between the king and the priesthood. It's a recurring theme throughout Egyptian history, isn't it? They're always jockeying for power. But didn't you mention Nubian pharaohs? That's not something you hear every day.
It's true. While Egypt's declining, you have this kingdom to the south, in Nubia, the Kushites. They've been heavily influenced by Egyptian culture for centuries. And they see an opportunity, right? Their king, Paye, he actually conquers Egypt, establishes the 25th dynasty.
So the conquerors become the conquered, and then they become the conquerors again. History's got a sense of humor, doesn't it? But did they keep up the Egyptian ways, like the traditions and stuff?
Oh, yeah, they did. They adopted Egyptian customs, kept building pyramids, ruled for several decades. It really shows you the power of cultural exchange, even in situations of conquest. But their reign It wasn't meant to last.
What happened? Did Egypt get hit with yet another wave of invaders?
Yep. This time it's the Assyrians. Powerful empire, super ruthless, coming down from Mesopotamia. They sweep through Egypt under kings, uh, Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal. They even sack Thebes.
Thebes, sacked. That must have been a devastating blow, not just physically, but like symbolically too. It's like the fall of Rome, the end of an era.
It was a major turning point, that's for sure. Egypt, they have a few more flickers of independence, like the Sayyid dynasty, but from then on, they're basically ruled by foreign powers.
Yep.
The Assyrians, then the Persians, and finally the Romans.
Which brings us to Cleopatra, the last pharaoh. What a legendary figure trying to hold on to her kingdom in the middle of all that Roman drama. It's a story for the ages.
She was a brilliant strategist, a diplomat, but she was up against it. With her death in 30 BC, Egypt becomes part of the Roman Empire. The long story of an independent civilization comes to an end.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? When you think about the sheer span of time we've covered, from Narmer unifying Upper and Lower Egypt, all the way to Cleopatra's last stand, thousands of years full of triumphs and tragedies, innovations, revolutions, all shaped by the rhythms of the Nile. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But you know what gets me? How much ancient Egypt still resonates with us today. Their art, their architecture, their beliefs, even their daily lives, they offer this window into a world that's both familiar and totally alien.
It's like we're looking into a mirror, but it's a mirror that's distorted, you know? We can see ourselves in them, but they're also fundamentally different.
And their story, it's not just about ancient history. It's about us, too. We're still grappling with those same big questions they faced about power, about religion, about how to deal with environmental pressures. It's like we're all connected through this shared human experience.
It makes you realize that some things, they just never change, do they?
Nope. And that cyclical nature of their history, the rise and fall of kingdoms, that tension between central authority and regional power, those patterns repeat themselves over and over again, even in our own time.
You know, it reminds me of that Ramses II statue, the one that got moved to London, the one that inspired Shelley to write that poem, Ozymandias. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. It's such a powerful image of how fleeting power can be and how time, it just keeps rolling on.
It's a good reminder to stay humble. So what can we learn from ancient Egypt? Maybe it's a lesson in adaptability, the need to balance ambition with sustainability, and that enduring power of the human spirit, that drive to create, to innovate, to strive for something bigger than ourselves.
Great points. So much to ponder. What about you, listeners? What stood out to you most in our little journey back to ancient Egypt? What surprised you? What challenged your understanding of history? We encourage you to dig deeper into the source material, explore further, and until next time, keep that spirit of discovery alive.